Hi, and welcome to the Build and Exit podcast. I'm Julie Wilkerson. I'm the owner and founder of Wilkerson Accounting Solutions, and I started the podcast off the back of the work I do in my company because we specialise in mergers and acquisitions, and I found there was a bit of a gap in the market of business owners and entrepreneurs really truly understanding financial statements. And this is why I launched the Build and Exit, so we can give tips and knowledge to investors and entrepreneurs of people who are looking to scale, grow and exit businesses. So I'm excited today to have David B Horne with me. Hi, David.
Hello.
David is got a wealth of knowledge, especially in funding for entrepreneurs. So a bit of background about David. Well, he's been working in funding for over 20 years through corporates, but has been sort of doing it solo for himself for the last 7 years, particularly working with female founders to obtain funding. Has raised about 110 million in total. He's a professional speaker and has done a very well-known TEDx talk with 3 million views. And he is the owner and founder of Funding Focus, which primarily helps female founders obtain the funding that we spoke about earlier. So I think it's a little bit different. We don't really necessarily talk about the acquisition journey today as such, but I think it's going to be really good for, especially female entrepreneurs and business owners to sort of hear this because there's some quite shocking statistics actually on funding for female entrepreneurs in general. So first of all, David, I want to thank you for coming on and hand over to you to sort of give a bit of background on why you wanted to come on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Yeah, lovely to be here, Julie. So, background, I trained as a chartered accountant in Vancouver, where I'm originally from, hence the accent. Qualified in 1987 and then moved with PwC to Zurich, Switzerland. I was an auditor in Zurich for a couple of years, and then my largest client, which was a subsidiary of the big US telecoms company, AT&T, gave me the proverbial job offer you can't refuse. So I jumped ship and became the financial controller of a technology business in Switzerland, worked with them for 4 years in Switzerland. And then we moved to London in 1993. Been in London ever since. And I spent basically until the end of the 90s working with big blue chip corporates, AT&T and the BBC. And then between 2000 and 2010, I was the chief financial officer of 3 very different companies that all had one thing in common. The first one was a PR agency. The second one was an AIM-listed digital media group. And for those who might not know what AIM-listed means, AIM is the alternative investment market, which is the junior market on the London Stock Exchange. So I was with that group for 4 years, and then I was headhunted to join another group, which was an online auction business, also listed on AIM. So during those 10 years, I had the 3 CFO roles in very, very different companies. But what they all did was that they raised capital and bought other companies. So I became a bit of an expert in fundraising and M&A. And yes, as you said, Julie, over the course of my career, I've raised in total about 110 million pounds. Perhaps less relevant to our discussion today, but I've also completed 28 M&A transactions. I'm currently working on 2 exits. So if we get those both away, then I'll be on 30, which is quite cool. And then I left corporate world at the end of 2010, and I've been running my own business since then. Started out just kind of doing part-time CFO work, and then really realized that my expertise had a very niche value, and that led me to writing my first book, Add Then Multiply, which is all about raising capital and buying companies. So certainly for your listeners who are interested in that, it'll be relevant. But as a result of that book coming out, I started getting invited to speak at events. And I was speaking at an event in Reading about fundraising for SMEs. And after my talk, a woman came up and asked why so little funding went to female founders. And I looked at her and I said, I have no idea, but I'll find out. So I went off and started to do some research. And you know how the universe just kind of makes things all of a sudden happen, and things are happening and you're meeting people and talking to things. So I happened to have a meeting with the chief executive of the British Business Bank. She and I had met at a function at the Institute of Directors a month or so previously. And this was just a follow-up to that meeting. And so we met and had a very pleasant conversation. And towards the end, I thought, well, I'll ask her if she knows anything about funding to female founders. And she kind of smiled and reached down into the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a bound research report called UK VC and Female Founders, which the British Business Bank had published maybe 2-3 months previously. And she gave me a copy of that, and we chatted about that. And I thought, okay, this is really useful. And this is where I started to get some idea of the statistics. So in that report, the British Business Bank looked at every venture capital deal in the UK in 2017. And they found that all female teams had submitted about 5% of the pitch decks and got less than 1% of the funding. Mixed gender teams
Oh,
at that
wow.
stage had submitted about 10% of the pitch decks and got 5% of the funding. And all male teams submitted 75% of the pitch decks and got 89% of the funding.
So that's quite interesting, isn't it? So let's just recap on those statistics. So you said less than 5% of women actually submit pitch decks in the first place.
It was about 5%, but less than 1% of
About
the total
5%
money went to women.
to women. And that's a really small percentage, isn't it? And what year was that in?
That was based on data in 2017.
Oh, so not many years ago, really, then, is it?
Nope. But it's interesting because as I became more deeply involved in this and I started to research it more, and I came across PitchBook, which is a huge data organization that it's part of Morningstar. And they collate data on all private equity and venture capital transactions. And they have been tracking the gender investment levels dating back to 2008. And in the UK and Europe, in 2008, the level of funding to female founders was 2.4%. In 2010, it was 2.2%. And in no other year in that 16-year history has it ever broken through 2%. It's currently sitting on 1.9.
Wow.
So there's really, you look at the chart and it's just going sideways. Now, what's interesting is in the last 5 years, there's been a marked trend upward in the level of funding to mixed gender teams. So again, the data from the British Business Bank report at the time was 10% of decks and 5% of funding. And they're now up around 18% of decks and north of 10% of funding. So it's getting better for mixed gender teams, but it's not changing for female founders. And it's the same story in the United States. Numbers are slightly higher, but in the US, it's never broken through 3%.
So when you delve behind the scenes then so first of all, I suppose one of the questions is, it's a low percentage submitting decks and going for funding in the first place. What do you think the background behind that is? From your research, why do women not often go for the funding in the first place, do you think?
I think there are a lot of issues there. I think, again, I didn't know the issue when this woman raised the question to me, but every woman I speak to knows about it. So the women were aware of it generally, and I think a lot of women realize it's really, really tough. I'm just going to bootstrap or maybe get some debt funding or something like that. So a lot of them don't go. But even the ones that don't get through, I think there are a number of issues that they face. Number one is just inherent gender bias. And when I was researching my second book, Funded Female Founders, I came across a fantastic study by Lego, the toy brick people. And they had looked at the playing habits of young children from the age of 6 months up until about 10. And they found that up until about 18 months, there was no sign of gender bias in the toys that kids played with or the way they played. And all of a sudden, around 18 months, little boys started to do construction and play with trucks and knock things over. And little girls started to play with dolls and house and all that. And what they weren't able to conclude, and I don't know the answer, is was that an imprinting of gender bias from the parents onto the children? Or is there something in our ancient brains that says, 100,000 years ago when we were all cave people, the majority of men were out hunting woolly mammoths and the majority of women were in the caves tanning the hides, smoking the meat to preserve it, looking after the children. And that's just something very deep in our minds that starts to happen. I don't know the answer to that. And, when you look at the move of feminism, equal, universal suffrage, all that. I mean, these developments are not much more than 100 years old, whereas humanity dates back, 100,000 years. So I don't know the answer to that one. But there's no question that there's gender bias. And certainly from the women that I've interviewed when I was researching the book, they all found that. So that's one. I think the next big one is there aren't many women in the venture capital industry. It's a really interesting focus. There was a study done in the late 2010s by Professor Dana Kanza, who's now at London Business School. She did her PhD at Columbia University in New York. And she looked at all of the TechCrunch startup battle pitch competitions from 2010 in New York, from 2010 till 2017. And she downloaded the videos and put them into some academic analysis software that's beyond my technology skills. But she analyzed all of the pitches and all of the Q&A sessions, and she found no material difference between the way men and women pitched. But she found huge variations in the kinds of questions that were asked, where 67% of the questions asked of male founders were what's called a promotional question. How are you going to double your market share? Where are you going to hire your next 100 employees? And 66% of the questions asked of female founders were what's called prevention questions. How are you going to protect your market share from the competition? What if some of your employees leave and set up against you? How are you going to, how are you going to protect against bad things happening? And what was really interesting was that both male and female investors showed the same bias. So it might be, again, because there are so few women in the investment industry, they've had to adapt and take on more, male characteristics to survive and thrive in their industry. I think we're slowly seeing change in that, but I was looking at statistics published recently by Diversity VC in the UK, and they found that they were analyzing the number of women employed in venture capital, and it hasn't changed over 5 years. There's still hardly any women on investment committees and things like that. So there's a huge kind of uphill battle. I think the other thing, and this is more relevant to the women themselves, is women tend to be very conservative in their financial projections, much more conservative than men. And if you look at the way the venture capital industry is modeled, they're always looking for the next unicorn. And if you're putting together a pitch deck and you're saying, well, here's my business and, I want to grow it to 25 or 50 million, that's great, but that's not going to be attractive to the venture capitalists. They want to know that it's going to be growing to something that's going to be worth $1 billion.
Yeah. And I think as well, so I know this from sort of back in my corporate days, because I used to do a lot of like research studies through corporate for management and things. I think also they call it feminine and masculine rather than so much male and female, because I suppose technically a male could have a feminine characteristic, but what they say is, so if you go back to like just going for a job, a feminine characteristic will look at the job spec and notice the 20% they can't do and not apply for the job, whereas the male characteristic, so the masculine characteristic, will look at the job spec and look at the 80% they can do and go for the job. So I wonder whether those characteristics are falling into the funding cycle where people are scared because they think, oh, I might not have this 10% of my business worked out. I can't go for the funding until I do it. I would imagine that's probably playing a part of why that characteristic isn't going for the decks in the first place.
Yep, I think that's an entirely legitimate point. Yes, absolutely.
So I suppose there's obviously a bit of a problem. It sounds like, the questions being asked then quite prohibitive, because I suppose if some women are reaching through those problems and getting to the pitch deck stage, but then the preventative questions, it starts bringing another challenge, because if it's quite a negative connotation when people are going, it then's more off-putting because you're having struggles. So you've obviously got this company that's helping females obtain funding. So what do you think are the answers? Like, how do you help or advise women to start the process of it in the first place?
Yep. Okay. I'm going to answer part of the question and I'll come back and do the other part. So the one thing that I didn't say that came out of Dana Kanza's study was that regardless of the gender of the founder, if the founder answered a prevention question with a promotion response, they were 14 times more likely to secure funding. So if you're asked a prevention question,
what's an example?
How are you going to protect? How are you going to protect how are you going to protect yourself from the competition? And and then it's almost like a politician's answer. Don't answer the question that they're asking. Just give the answer that you want to give. So don't say, well, we could protect ourselves in this way, or we could do this. You just say, well, look, we're focused on really growing this business. We've got this much we've got this many followers now. We've got a wait list with this many people who want to sign up to our product once it's launched. So don't even address that negative question. Simply give the bullish, positive answer. And I know for some people that can be really hard. But it just requires a little bit of training. But I mean, anyone who's ever watched a politician on TV, and we've got an election going on in the UK right now, they get asked questions and they don't want to answer them, so they give a totally different answer, which is the message that they want to give. So be like the politicians.
Yeah.
I kind of hate saying that, but give the answer that you want to give rather than the answer to the question that they're asking. 14 times more likely to secure funding.
So that's a good tip.
One of the very clear and consistent messages that came out of my research was that the best chance of getting in front of a venture capitalist is by having a warm introduction to them. So someone that they know reaches out and says, "Hey, David, I think you should meet Julie. She's got this great business idea. Here's her pitch deck. Here's her contact details." Boom, boom. And that's much, much more likely to get a response than, "Oh, well, here's venture capital firm XYZ, and it says, for entrepreneurs, submit your pitch deck here, fill out a little Google form, attach your deck, and we might get back in touch with you if there's interest." The reality in that latter section, and again, this is based on interviews from when I was researching the book, but I spoke with the managing partner of a medium-sized venture capital firm in London. And he told me that in the prior year to when we spoke, so that would have been 2022, his firm received 8,000 pitch decks through their website. They made 16 investments.
Yeah.
So the reality is, if you just submit a cold pitch deck, maybe you'll get lucky. But the reality is, the most junior member of staff is going to have, part of their job will be to review the pitch decks that come in every day. And just think about it, 8,000, that's 160 a week. That's like 32 a day. And this junior staff member, this will be probably an hour of their day. So literally the first pass, you're going to get 10 seconds. Is this going to go on the yes pile or the no pile? Boom, boom. And then the ones that go onto the yes pile, you've maybe got a minute to look at them, and then they'll cut them again, and then they'll get down out of their 32, and they might have 5 to put forward to the next level up, which would be an analyst. And the analyst might give them 5 minutes each and then decide, well, are any of these a good fit or not? But it's literally that kind of a brutal filtering process every day. So the best option is to get a warm introduction. Now, a lot of people say, well, I don't know anyone in the venture capital industry. How do I do that? My advice to people is do your research first of all, and find out what are the kind of venture capital firms that are potential investors in your business. And again, the VC firms, when they go out and raise money from their limited partners, they have a very clear mandate. There are very few generalist venture capitalists. Most of them will say, we invest in biotech at seed and pre-seed stage, or we invest in fintech at Series A and above, or whatever. So find out what their investment criteria are, and if you fit, great. If you don't fit, don't waste your time applying, because if you're a fintech startup, don't bother applying to a company that invests in, if you're a biotech startup, don't bother applying to a firm that invests in fintech at Series A, because they're not going to be interested. You're going to be immediately onto the no pile. It's a complete waste of time. So first of all, find the firms that look like there's a match. Then go onto their site and have a look at who else they've invested in. And not all of them do. Some of them, their websites are hardly any information, but a lot of them show what are the companies that they've invested in. And my advice to people is reach out to one of the founders of those companies and just try and build a relationship with them. Explain, hi, my name's Julie. I'm the founder of Julie Wilkinson Accounting. I'm building this. I'm going to be looking for venture capital funding in the next year. I noticed that you were funded by XYZ. Could we have a chat? I'd love to hear more about your experience. And literally just develop a relationship with this founder. And I've certainly found, I've been working with founders exclusively for the last 14 years, and I've found most founders are very happy to talk to other founders. Because they get it. And so if you develop that relationship and just, take them out for a coffee or lunch and have a chat and really just develop that human connection. And then when you're ready, say, hey, would you mind introducing me to the investor? And there's your warm lead.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. So that's a good idea. So you think, one of them is to search the venture capitalists you're looking for, then find a founder that maybe has been invested and potentially reach out to see if you can get an introduction effectively, isn't it? Okay.
That's
And have you
the
got any
end
other
goal, but
tips?
be a little bit more, be a little bit subtle and develop. Don't just reach out and say, "Hey, can you give me
Yeah, of
an intro?"
course. Yeah.
Build a relationship first. But yeah,
No, that's similar to sort of just relationships on LinkedIn and things, isn't it? You don't often just reach out straight to someone and go, I want this. You find people who you think might help and potentially build some relationships to see whether there's a support
it,
they can give
it,
you in in the future.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. The other thing to do, apply for pitching competitions, get experience pitching. Pitching competitions, I like them and I hate them at the same time because they're so artificial. You've got 3 or 4 minutes to stand up and try and get a lot of things over. And, the reality is when you're going to be pitching to a venture capitalist properly, you're going to have at least half an hour to sit down and go through stuff. And as you go through if you progress through to the various stages, it'll get a lot deeper and a lot more intensive and time consuming. But go to the pitching competitions, get practice, get feedback, because that's one of the great things. If you go to the pitching competitions, you often get feedback from the investors, and they say, "Well, I like this about your pitch, and you need to work on this, and you didn't cover that." So just get out there. Go to networking events where investors are hanging out. You can find them on Meetup or on Eventbrite. There's lots of different firms. Some of the venture capital firms, one or two, I can't remember their names off the top of my head, but one or two that I know actually have a female founder hour once a month where it's like, okay, if you're a female founder, come online, come and meet other female founders, come and meet us, let's talk. Because there are a few funds that like to support female founders, but a lot of them claim they do, but the statistics show that the money's still not flowing.
And can I just ask a quick question? So, in terms of this venture capitalism for women, is it typically people sort of start in, fintech or whatever, new companies, or is there venture capitalists out there that support funding for the M&A journey specifically? What's your experience of it for female founders?
Funding for the M&A journey is typically more of a private equity thing than a venture capital thing. And just venture capital is typically early stage. Venture capital might go up to Series A or Series B, but once you're starting to get into bigger numbers or doing an industry roll up or something like that, you're much more likely to be approaching a private equity firm.
Sorry, and for people that don't know, what sort of values are you talking about? Series A and Series B. What
so
level of funding?
So in the UK, Series A is kind of 1 to 10 million, and Series B is 10 to 50 million. In the USA, you can probably double those numbers.
If people need for funding below the million mark,
it's venture capital, and that would be a seed or a pre-seed level. Yeah, or and depending on the nature of the business, crowdfunding is also a route to go down. And again, research from the book, there was a study published in Australia that found that the biggest crowdfunding site in Australia, they looked at all of the deals that they'd done over a 12-month period, and 40% of the money invested went to female founders. So crowdfunding could be another route to go down for female founders. One of the women who features in the book, she runs a fascinating biotech business. So she's a scientist by background, PhD research scientist, but they've developed a personalized skin tissue therapy for people with bad burns. So instead of, if you've got burns all over your chest, instead of taking a graft off of your leg or something, they actually create skin that matches to you scientifically.
Oh, wow.
They've raised about $50 million. They bypassed the venture capital industry entirely and went to a family office where they felt there was a strong connection, and they've been hugely supported by this family office. So there are other routes you can go down besides venture capital. And certainly for female founders, I would say at the earlier stage, crowdfunding is attractive. And again, depending on where you are in the world, for your UK listeners, there are a number of large crowdfunding sites. In the US, it's a little more regulated. But again, in the US, there's access to deeper pools of capital. But you have to follow the SEC rules under, it's called Reg CF, which is for crowdfunding, and Reg A that have different thresholds and stuff that you've got to go through. But crowdfunding is a viable option and a growing one.
Okay. So your specific role then, if people, work with you, is your business where you help female founders. What do you help them with specifically?
So and again, it's kind of there's a crossover point. So funding focus, which is the social enterprise, is all about raising awareness, providing education. We've been trying to raise a fund. We haven't gotten it away yet. We've put it on hold right now because there's too much geopolitical instability in the world. But hopefully things will settle down in the next 12 months and we'll come back to market and try and raise a fund. And the idea was that this was going to be a fund that would invest in businesses where at least one member of the founding team was female. And it was going to be something different from venture capital in a couple of ways. Number one, it was going to be a listed vehicle. So it was going to be listed on the London Stock Exchange. And the reason for that was twofold. Number one, to bring transparency to a very opaque world. So many of the people when I was interviewing them just said, I put my stuff into the venture capital firm. I never hear anything. It's like it goes into a black hole. So I'm trying to bring some transparency. And the other thing is, as a listed company, anytime you put out a news piece, it gets picked up on all the news wires. So really to amplify the message of what we're doing. So that was what we were trying to do. But basically, we were trying to create something that was more focused and tailored to the types of businesses that many women are creating. And as I said, not all women are interested in building a business up to be the unicorn, the $1 billion valuation, because they might have other commitments, they might have other priorities, they might have families. And yes, sure, you get people like Whitney Wolfe Herd from Bumble who have created amazing $1 billion public companies, but they're few and far between. But there are many, many women I've come across who would love to build a business up to 20, 50, 100 million. And we were looking at supporting that pathway because we were going to be different from the venture capital industry. And if you step back and look at venture capital critically, let's say you've raised a $50 million fund or a £50 million fund, and you're going to go out and you're going to invest you're going to invest $500,000 into 100 companies. Going into it that 20% of those companies are going to go bust. And 75% of those companies are going to become what they call zombies. They don't go anywhere. They make enough money to just keep ticking over, but they're not throwing off any cash. Nobody's going to invest anything more. They often end up being sold off to restructuring specialists or sometimes sold back to the founders. And that leaves 5 companies that are going to make money. And, one or two of them might return 2x and one or two of them might return 5x, but it's that one moonshot unicorn that returns all of the money back to the investors, plus all of the profits, plus the carried interest that goes to the venture capital fund. And happy days, aren't we the smartest people in the room? A few venture capitalists admit that they're actually sophisticated gamblers. And what I was looking at with the fund that I was trying to build was, I'm going to invest in slightly later stage businesses. And let's say I raise 50 million. But instead of putting it in 100 companies, I'm going to put it in 25 companies on an average of 2 million each. But these are companies that are already, they've already gotten off the ground. They've proven themselves. They've established themselves. Let's now grow them. But I'm not going to be in a situation where 95% of my companies are worthless and I'm reliant on 5% to make everything. I might have a situation where 10% of those companies are worthless, but the rest of them are going to be making money. So I'm not hoping, oh my God, how am I going to get a unicorn? But actually, if I can have a pool of companies that across them generate on average a return of 3, 4, 5x, happy days, and the investors should be very happy about that. So we're gonna go back to market next year if conditions stabilize a little bit and try again to raise it. We've got everything lined up. We've got a prospectus that's been through the FCA. It's got one final stage to go through with the FCA, but there was no point going through that because we hadn't been able to raise the money.
And what about you personally? Do you ever invest in businesses yourself, or?
I do. Yeah, I'm an angel investor. I've invested in 9 or 10 companies so far.
9 or 10. Do you have so many a year you invest in, or?
No, I do it based on what financial resources I have available to me.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Oh, wow. Well, we're coming to the end of the podcast anyway. It's been really good, David, because I think it's really useful for people to hear, especially obviously women, to hear, where the problems are and what they can do to, help themselves get into the sort of funding space. Because I know, being in M&A myself, and obviously I'm leading sort of a lot of projects, I don't see many women in the M&A space or investment space.
Yep.
I definitely 95% of the people we work with are male. I am seeing that. I am actually my next podcast episode going out actually is a woman. So I am seeing more of them coming in, but it is definitely male orientated. So, have you got any final thoughts that you want to share with the audience before we go off?
Yeah, I mean, my advice to female founders is don't give up. Keep working at it. Keep trying. Yes, you're facing a very uphill battle, but keep fighting it. Believe in yourself, and be resourceful. Look at other ways of trying to find solutions, but don't give up.
And what's the name of the book, just so people can find it?
Funded Female Founders.
Brilliant. Well, I definitely think people should read it, because I know quite a few women who are, I do get approached for people who are looking for funding and things like that. So that will definitely be a great book for them. So I just want to thank you for coming on, David.
My pleasure, Julie.
Thank you. And I just want to thank all of our listeners. It's been such a whirlwind the last 12 months since I've had the podcast. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.